knows it will be recorded today, so we can share with you the recording if there's something you want to rewatch or pass along to anyone that you're working with. So thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Andrea Karstens. I'm the FieldView Field Product Specialist for Western Canada. I've been in this role for just over a year now. Prior to this, I spent a year with the FieldView team actually in Ontario, working with some growers and retails out there, which is a lot of fun. I learned a lot of things, but happy to be back here in the West. And prior to that, I was part of the Bayer team selling canola seed. So I'm excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about pre-harvest and some things we can do beforehand to get set up and be ready to go this fall with FieldView. I mentioned these things about WebEx before. If you do have any questions throughout, definitely feel free to throw them in that chat box and we'll answer them as we go. And if there's anything that needs to be chatted about, we can do that at the end of the presentation. So first off here, just a little agenda. So we'll talk about iPads and updates a little bit, what we can do if we don't have a compatible yield monitor. And then I'll just go into my iPad, do some demos, walk you through a harvest setup, all that sort of thing. So first I want to pause on here. So there are some options if we don't have a compatible yield monitor with FieldView. So one option is definitely data inbox if it's not a combine that is FieldView Drive compatible. So there's lots of information on that, and we can send out some links after the webinar today on how we could do that. Another option is manual yield maps. So this means that we can create a yield map based on satellite imagery and the weight that you're pulling off maybe from a grain cart or from a weigh scale ticket. And the other one would be a more affordable yield monitor option, such as a Farm Tracks or a Farm TRX aftermarket yield monitor. Those are usually under $2,000 and can easily be installed on your combine. And then that information from those yield monitors is then able to be data inboxed into FieldView. So there definitely are some options if you're on FieldView and don't have 100% compatibility. Next thing I want to just chat about for a couple minutes is our iPads and how Apple is supporting those. So Apple is continually releasing new iPads. And if you look at this list on the right side of the screen here, you can see different highlights. So the highlighted in red mean it's no longer compatible with FieldView. This is because the iPad is no longer to update past 10.3.3, and to run FieldView, we have to be on a newer version of iOS. When we look at the yellow iPads, those iPads are no longer able to be updated to the latest iOS either, but we can still run FieldView on them. So they're still Apple supported. The reason they're in yellow is because they likely won't be supported by Apple in the near future, which means we won't be able to run FieldView on them either. The white are all things that are current. Green is something that we recommend if you're purchasing a new device. If you are purchasing a new device, or maybe your iPad's in the red or the yellow category, definitely recommend getting something newer, because after about 5 years, those iPads are no longer supported by Apple, and therefore we can't push new app updates to them. So just something to think about. So if you want to refer back to this list of iPads, you can go to climatefieldview.ca, click on support, and if you type iPad into that support page, you'll get this list and you can double check. And of course, if you do have any specific questions about this, you can reach out to support at any time, and they're more than happy to walk you through this. Next thing I want to talk about is updates. So with FieldView, it is an app, just like any of the other apps you're using on your phone, and there is constantly updates to improve software and to give better user experience. So currently the most up-to-date FieldView Cab app is 9.1.2. The most up-to-date Black app is 6.12. And the current iOS version for your iPad is 13.6. So we recommend that you update your iPad if it's currently not on 13.6. And when I flip over to my iPad, I'll show you where you can find that. The reason we want you to update to 13.6 is because in the fall, Apple always releases a new iOS, a major iOS. So they will release iOS 14 within the next few weeks here. And what that means is there's often bugs in some of the apps that we're using because they're not, they haven't been used on that new iOS version yet. So we recommend being up to 13.6 and then waiting to update till iOS 14 until after harvest, when we have a little bit more time to play around. If things change on our iPad or it changes a little bit how the apps are working, then we don't have to worry about that till after harvest. So I'll show you what that looks like in the iPads as well. There will also be a new CAB app update coming, FieldViewᵀᴹ version 10, which will be in the next few weeks as well. This has some improved functionality and some different features. But if you're having a good experience running on 9.1.2, also just leave that CAB app update until after harvest as well. If you run into issues or something doesn't seem to be working quite right, the recommendation from support will be to update that CAB app. But if everything's working well, make sure before you start harvest that these are the versions that you're on, and then wait until harvest to update everything. So this just talks about how to turn our auto updates off. So I'm just going to jump into my iPad and show you guys where you can find this if you want to walk through it with me. So if I go over to my iPad here, I'm going to go into my iPad settings, and I'll try to use my mouse so you guys can see where I'm pointing. And then here I'm in settings and I'm in general. So when you click into general, this is what you get. And there's a couple ways to see what version we're on. So if you click into About, this gives you all of the information on your iPad, which is just really nice to know what model you have, etc. If you're looking for if that iPad's gonna be not supported soon or anything. But you can see here the software version my iPad on is 13.6.1. So this is up to date. So I'm gonna press back or general. If you come into the software update right here, you can see it checks for updates and you can see it says it's up to date there. If you are not on 13.6.1, it will give you the option to download and install this iOS version. Like I said, I would recommend you do if you're not there already. So if I click into Customize Automatic Updates, this is where I can turn off the install iPad iOS update. So I'm going to turn that off because I don't want it to automatically update to iOS 14 this fall. Also going to turn this off so I have complete control about when that update gets downloaded and when it gets installed on my iPad. So that's how we would check our software updates. The other thing we can do is turn off the auto app updates. So if I go here to my App Store, iTunes and App Store, and same thing here, I have, this is over cellular data, but if I go into this app downloads, I can change this to always allow or always ask. So I've changed mine to always ask. So this way my apps won't get updated without me knowing. So that is kind of the piece on apps and how we can do that. While we're in our iPad settings, I also want to talk about storage. We're talking about iPads. Just like any of our devices, there's only a certain amount of storage on them. So I can find the storage by scrolling through, or if you go up to the top of your settings, this is often what I do. I just find it a little bit easier. If I go to search and type in storage, it brings up all the options with storage. So I can go into storage, general, and then it's going to show me how much memory I have left on my iPad. So the biggest reason this is important is because when your iPad starts to get full, FieldView has nowhere to save your data as you're combining or seeding, spraying. So it's important to ensure we give it enough memory to be able to capture all that data that you're collecting. So you can see here, I have a 128 gigabyte iPad. I'm only using about 30 gigs. I don't have a ton of extra apps on this iPad. And you can see how many gigabytes each app is using. Obviously, I have a good chunk of photos in there. My FieldViewᵀᴹ app is 3 gigs, things like that. And this way you can just have a good understanding. So if your iPad is getting full and you're running out of storage, my first recommendation is to get rid of any apps that you don't need. That's the quickest way to free up some space. The other one would be if you have a lot of videos and photos on your iPad, you could always connect that to the cloud and not store the actual photos and videos on your iPad. So just as an example, let's see, do I have an app I can delete? I'm going to delete the Tasks app. I can always re-download it at any time, but if I wanted to delete this app, I would take my finger and press and hold, and this little button comes up here, and then I can hit delete, and then it will be deleted, and that will free up some space on my iPad. So just a way that if you are getting low on space, you can delete those apps. I'll show you another way you can do that when we're in the Cab app. So that's kind of all I have for just iPad settings and that sort of thing. I'm going to go into my Cab app now and start walking through a few other things. So I'm going to start by going into settings in my FieldViewᵀᴹ app, just to walk through a couple of things. The first thing I want to point out here is the yield units, or sorry, just the units in general. If you have just recently downloaded the Cab app, it is a chance that this is in metric, so I want you to switch it over to English. That will give us acres per bushel, inches, all those sorts of things, so recommend that. The other one I want to talk about is edit yield units. So I'm going to click in here. And this is so you can change some of your crops to pounds. So one that comes to the top of my mind, being from Western Canada, is lentils. And we always want to usually keep track of lentils in pounds. So I have the option to change that to pounds if it was bushels or vice versa. And then exit out of here, and that will save. So just to make it easier for you to calculate yield in some of those crops that we're not measuring in bushels. The Cloud Sync button, I also want to point that out. So this is how we get our data to the cloud. So maybe you don't have any data on your iPad, you're just collecting on your iPad, and then when you get to a Wi-Fi signal, you're going to Cloud Sync your iPad. So you can click that little circle button there, and it will send that information to the cloud. And below it, you see enabled and disabled. If you have multiple combines running in the field and you have data on all your iPads, you might be using the shared swath feature, which is a great feature that allows you to see where everyone else in the field has already combined. With that shared swath feature, you can actually disable your Cloud Sync, and the coverage maps will still show. So the data won't sync to the other iPads, but the coverage will, just so you can still use that feature without using as much data. And then when you get to maybe the yard and there's Wi-Fi, or maybe once a day you want a Cloud Sync, you can enable that Cloud Sync and sync that information. That's just if you're seeing that your iPads seem to be using a lot more data than you would like, you can use that option. While we're in settings here, also want to just go into data for a second. And we talked about the available data. So you can see this is another spot where it shows that I have 94 gigabytes remaining. So I would be good to go for harvest. But the other thing you can see in the Cab app here is if I scroll, you can see I have data all the way back to 2010, and there's no information there. So I've actually removed the data from all those years from 2010 to 2015 from my iPad just to free up more space. So that information is still stored in the cloud, but it's just not on my iPad. So just another way to free up space within your cab app. So if I clicked into 2016, I could hit clear 2016 data and I would gain 106 more megabytes of space. So that's not a ton, so I'm not going to worry about it. But if you do have a few gigabytes of data from 2013, then this is something you could do to get to free up some space. So let's go into setting up a combine here. So in equipment, I'm going to go to, use my mouse here. Oops. Not that. Add new equipment. Scroll down until I find a combine. Click next. Choose my combine make. Click next. Series, next. Model, next. Enter a name. Whatever you want to name that combine. Next. Next. Okay, so it gets to the GPS offset, so it's important to know where that GPS is in relation to that header and the rest of the combines. You can enter in that information. I want to talk about heads for a second. So if I click into heads here, you can see I have some that are already built. I'm going to click add a new head. It defaults to a row crop, so if you are harvesting corn, this is the head that you would use, of course, and you can just update the row sections by clicking in there. And then, of course, the row spacing is important if we're talking about the rows to ensure that yield data is collected properly. I'm going to switch this over to a platform. So most of us are likely going to be using a platform header. It defaults to 32 swath sections. That's just how many chunks of data that FieldView is going to record within that header. So I would just leave it at 32. The most important thing with the platform head is going to be this head width. So 480 is that 40-foot head. If you have a smaller header or a wider header, you can update that. And then, of course, if you were using a pickup header, you would enter this in as your swath or header width to make sure that FieldView is able to calculate that yield properly. So the last one here is the maxed harvesting height. And this is where we set our header at so that FieldView knows when to collect harvest data and when to not collect harvest data. So if I go to hit set harvest height, it's going to ask me to put my header to the position where I would be harvesting. Tap next, and it isn't able to read it because I'm not connected to a combine right now. But if you're in your combine, FieldView is not going to let you start combining until you've done this, and it will walk you through what it wants you to do. As a rule of thumb, if you are normally harvesting at about 30%, we would recommend entering about 40% into FieldView, just with elevation changes, topography changes. That way we collect all of the yield data. And then if your header is lifted up past that, FieldView will no longer collect yield data as you're maybe driving across the field or driving to empty the combine or something like that. If you do drive across the field at that 30%, then it will still record the yield data. It's a little bit about headers, so I'm going to hit done. And then I'm going to talk about settings here. So I have the shared swath turned on. If you have multiple combines in the field, you'll want to do that as well. Automatic swath sensitivity, just leave that here at less sensitive. And then the flow sensor lag at 14 seconds. This is an average. This is measuring from the time it hits the cutter bar to when it goes into the combine tank. So if you're noticing that you're getting a gap when you're on the edge of your field, you could make this less. And some of the cloth combines, as far as I understand, we usually have to make this a little bit smaller, but you'll probably notice when you're combining. So for the most part, that should be fairly accurate. The other one I want to point out here is the crop settings. So if I go to canola, it's likely what we're looking at in Western Canada, a nominal mate of 52, nominal moisture of 10. If you're seeing discrepancies between your yield monitor and FieldView, there's a potential that these numbers are entered in differently. So your yield monitor might be using a different nominal weight or nominal moisture which could cause discrepancies between the two. So I'm going to hit done, and we've now built our combine. It'll show up at the bottom here under webinar. So now I want to talk about connecting our FieldView drive quick. So I'm going to go back to my iPad settings actually. So if I double click, I can go into my settings. I'm going to go to storage here and go to Bluetooth. My Bluetooth is on. I'm going to plug in my drive. Actually, I'm going to back up for a second. Before I plug in my drive, before you start harvesting, the first time you connect your drive, I recommend just going and hitting forget device. This just sort of resets that Bluetooth connection, just like restarting our phones or our computers. It doesn't happen that often, probably not as often as it should. So I just like to do that before I start a season. So when I plug my drive in, it's going to come up under other devices here, and I'll be able to connect it right up. And you can see my harvest demo is now connected. I'm going to go back to my cab app. I'm going to go into my settings, into devices, and you can see that harvest demo is connected. So I want to click on this edit button for a second to show you guys a couple things. This is where we can find the offload status. So if you seem to be missing data, it could still be on that FieldView drive and it just hasn't got a chance to offload, especially if we turned off the combine or turned off the iPad right at the end of a field and the drive didn't have enough time to finish offloading. This is where we can see that. And the other one is Diagnostics here. This just shows everything that FieldView drive can read. So just if those bubbles turn green, that means we're good to go. I'm going to go back home and go into map. You can see here, I have the combine options. So I would go and I would select a field and you'd get that same pop-up. If you are on the edge of your field, would you like to make this active if you have your settings set to prompt? So when you have your field boundaries in FieldView ahead of time, I suspect most of you would, you can harvest either way. You can add them on the go or you would have them in ahead of time. You have three options. So if I click on this yields button here and hit edit map options, you can see the field boundary detection has three options: prompt, auto, and disabled. So I have mine set to disabled. Wouldn't normally recommend that unless you're doing a trial and you're working with your agronomist and they have recommended you to do that, because with disabled, you do have to remember to switch fields every single time you switch fields in the combine. So it won't do it automatically. With auto, it will auto select the field. So if you are maybe going across two fields that you're combining as one, it won't be perfect, but it will auto select the field. This means you don't have to select a field at all and it won't bring up those prompts, which can be nice for operators who aren't as comfortable with the iPad. When they get the prompt, they just want it to go away, and it makes it a little bit more difficult for them. So auto can be a really good option. And if data does end up in the wrong boundary, the nice thing is we do have some tools to help fix that, and support can help us with that. I think prompt is probably our most recommended option. When we have it on prompt, when I get to the edge of the field, because my combine GPS is connected to FieldView, it's going to ask, do you want to make the home quarter active, because that's the field that you're in, and you could hit yes. So like I said, that's probably most recommended. It wants to add, make a different field active, so I'll just let it go. But the auto is a great option if someone's not comfortable with that pop-up. Hit out here, and you can see here, this is what it would look like if I was combining. So there's my combine there. And he's collecting yield data. So along the left side, you see the different panes. If I hit edit, I can substitute any of those panes and customize them depending on what information I want to look at. So maybe I want to look at load acres. Instead, I just push and hold and drag that over to my panes there. So I have the option to move any of those around. You can also see at the bottom, my head height there is 40%. So there's the current header height, and then I have my max harvest height set to 65 in this case. I could change that to 45 if that makes more sense for me. Currently, he's harvesting barley, and I'm on load 1. So the loads is an option if you do have maybe a trial out there that you don't have your planting data in FieldView or spraying data in FieldView. If you hit new load, it's going to separate out that information. Or maybe you just see some areas in the field that aren't as good and you want to keep track of what the yield was in those different areas. You can use that load tool to keep track. So if I go now to my load map, you can see where I switched, and it's going to keep track of those as different buckets. The other thing here is these little green boxes at the bottom of the screen that you can see. When it's not collecting yield data, those will all be red. And say we get to the edge of the field or end of the field and we're harvesting just that little triangle, it will start to shut off these automatically based on information that it's already collected about where the crop has been harvested. So that is what it would look like for harvest. If I did have my planting layer in there, I could split screen and look at my planting layer beside my harvest layer. I don't have any planting information for this demo, but I would be able to look at my trials right side by side on the go if I wanted to. And then I always have the option to see that harvest summary as I go. So you can see only have about 1 acre harvested. That's the weight, the moisture, etc. So yeah, a couple other things. We always have the option to remote view. So if this is me out combining here, my brother has the option to grab another iPad or his iPhone and remote view. With that remote view feature, he's able to see exactly what I'm seeing on the screen. So if you want more information about that, recommend going to our support page, typing in remote view, and there's some articles on that. The last thing I just want to touch on quick is clean field boundaries. So there, in some instances, I'm just going to go back to my PowerPoint here for a second. And just show you, so you can see on the picture on the left, 2 boundaries right on top of each other. This happens sometimes when we're uploading more data. So some issues like that could cause some messy things to happen in the background. The next webinar I'm going to have is in September, and we're going to talk about how we can clean some of that up, whether it's after harvest or before harvest. We have some tools that can help clean it up, even if your field boundaries do look like this. Support's here to help us do that, and then I can show you some ways to help clean that up as well on our next webinar. So that's about all I wanted to go through today with you guys. I'll just pause there and see if Rosie has seen any questions that maybe it's worth chatting about, or if she wants to add anything that she thinks I might have missed.
Yeah, a question just came in from Damien that I haven't answered yet about sometimes customers have several crop kinds per year. What do we recommend?
Yeah, that happened a lot last fall, and I know that was a bug that hopefully should be a bit more resolved this fall. But if it's happening, with the same as the mesh boundaries, there is a fix-it tool that we can easily adjust that after. So if it continues to happen and your wheat field, it keeps saying sunflowers or peas, whatever that is, just leave it. And then we're more than happy to help you work through that after harvest to make sure that we get the correct crops in there. So if you call into support or contact your local field person, we can help you to make sure that those get switched back to the correct crops. And if it is still happening, definitely let us know. We hope that it isn't happening this fall, but there is still a chance. And like I said, we can definitely help you get that sorted out after harvest.
Are there any more questions? I think that's all good from my side then, Andrea.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us or our support line. I see the number's not on this slide, so let me pull that up for you. 1-888-924-7475, which can be found on our website. And then, yeah, or hit us up on Twitter. We can definitely help answer your questions on there. So thanks so much for joining us. We hope everyone has a safe harvest. Best of luck to everyone, and definitely reach out if you do need a hand with anything. And have a great day.